Welcome to Ink to Gold, a Pages of Possibilities podcast. I'm discussing Steve Black's article, How is Business Journaling Different from Personal Journaling? So, picture this scenario for a second. You sit down at your desk on Tuesday morning, coffee in hand, and you're ready to map out your Q3 revenue projections.
Yeah, ready to get to work.
Right. So you open your notebook to start outlining the strategy, and your brain is it's instantly paralyzed. Because staring back at you from the opposite page is this frantic, angry scribble about an argument you had with your spouse the night before.
Oh, yeah. That is brutal.
It really is. Today, we are unpacking why keeping all your thoughts in one single place might actually be, well, the worst thing a business owner can do.
And we are looking at this through the lens of Steve Black, who brings over 40 years of hands-on entrepreneurial experience to this topic. So, I mean, this isn't some abstract theory or a flashy productivity hack you read on a blog somewhere.
No, definitely not.
Right. This is a survival mechanism. It was born out of the friction and the sheer pain of doing it wrong for years while trying to run actual companies. And the physical setup Steve landed on to solve this friction is, it's remarkably mundane.
Mundane is the right word for it.
Yeah, he keeps two plain-lined notebooks. They are physically identical, but one stays permanently on his desk in the office, and the other, well, it never leaves his nightstand.
Two identical objects, but completely different ecosystems. I actually want to challenge the necessity of this right away, because as entrepreneurs, we're constantly told to consolidate our tools, right? We use unified dashboards all in one software.
Sure, consolidate everything.
Exactly.
Yep.
So why not have one master notebook for everything in your life? Is switching between personal and business thoughts really that detrimental? I mean, I switch from email to spreadsheets all day long.
I get that, but switching tasks is entirely different from switching brain states. Mixing those ecosystems, according to Steve's hard-won experience anyway, creates a psychological disaster he literally calls contamination.
Contamination. Wow, that's a strong word.
It is, but it's accurate. You are demanding your brain to simultaneously hold two totally conflicting states of operation. There's the highly vulnerable emotional feeling state that's required for personal reflection. And then there's the armored analytical strategic state required for business execution.
Ah, okay. So when you put them on the same page, the mechanism just breaks down.
Completely. The cognitive load of jumping between vulnerability and armor exhausts you. Your business thinking gets bogged down by unfinished emotional processing. You try to outline that Q3 strategy, but your subconscious is still, chewing on the personal conflicts you wrote about just a paragraph above.
Right. Your brain is stuck on the fight with your spouse.
Yeah, and the reverse happens as well. Your personal reflection gets rushed because you have this looming, stressful business agenda sitting on the very next page, just demanding your attention.
I hate that feeling.
Right. You cannot actually relax and process a complex emotion if, like, a bulleted list of late client deliverables is glaring at you from the margins. By separating them into two physical spaces, you eliminate that cognitive tax entirely. Both practices become significantly sharper because you don't have to fight your own previous thoughts.
That makes a lot of sense. So for the entrepreneur, solopreneur listening to this right now, the mission today is to teach you the specific mechanics of splitting these practices. We are going to focus heavily on what you actually need to do when you sit down with either notebook, ensuring you approach the blank page with the exact right intent.
And understanding that intent, it really starts with defining the fundamental functional difference in what each journal is hired to accomplish. You can't separate them effectively if you don't define the specific questions driving each practice.
Right.
So the personal journal asks things like, how do I feel? What is happening in my inner life? What do I need to process or understand about my own reactions right now? It is an entirely inward-facing exploratory space.
And the physical act of writing itself is often the primary goal there, isn't it? You are writing specifically to metabolize your emotions.
Exactly. Once the emotion is processed onto the page, the journal has done its job. The processing is the benefit. But the business journal, well, it operates on a completely different frequency.
Because it's outward-facing.
Yes. It must be outward-facing, it asks. What is actually happening in business? Why is it happening? What should I do about it? And, crucially, it asks, what did I expect to happen and what did I actually get? It is just relentlessly analytical and objective.
Thinking about the tools we use to observe the world makes this distinction a lot clearer. Personal journaling is kind of like a mirror.
A mirror, yeah, I like that analogy.
You hold it up to reflect yourself. You look at your own image, your own internal state, trying to get a clear picture of who you are and how you feel in that raw, unguarded moment. But a business journal is not a mirror. It is a microscope. It's a diagnostic tool.
A diagnostic tool is the perfect framework. Think about how a microscope actually works. You don't just shove a massive, complex organism under the lens and hope to understand it. You have to slice off a tiny specific piece, put it on a glass slide, and isolate it from its environment.
That isolation is the entire point.
Hmm.
When you use the business journal, you are taking a specific outward problem, maybe a sudden drop in customer retention, a severe bottleneck in production, or even a confusing dynamic with a supplier, and you're putting it on the slide.
Right.
You isolate the variables of that business problem away from the emotional noise of your day. You analyze it to figure out the mechanics of the failure and how to engineer a fix.
And the practical outcome of this isolation is that the business journal ceases to be just a safe space for expression. It transforms into a specialized instrument designed to produce forward action. You write to think through a specific bottleneck, and that thinking must ultimately result in a tangible decision or a change in your professional behavior.
So if it doesn't lead to an action,
If it does not lead to an outcome, you aren't business journaling, you are just complaining on paper.
ouch. Fair enough, though. Knowing the distinct goals, the mirror versus the microscope, dictates what actually goes on the page. So we need to categorize the chaos of an entrepreneur's mind. What specifically belongs in each bucket?
Well, the personal journal covers identity and emotion. It captures your moods, relationships, personal conflicts, life transitions outside of work, and daily observations. The business journal covers direct entrepreneurial needs. It tracks the decisions you are currently facing and the hard logic behind them. It captures lessons learned from completed projects, maps out strategic direction, and houses your quarterly planning.
I have to push back here because this sounds very clean in theory, but reality is incredibly messy. What if the business enemies my personal life?
The classic founder's dilemma.
Exactly. As a founder, my identity is often completely wrapped up in my company's performance. If I have intense, keep me up at night stress because my biggest client is threatening to pull a massive contract, I am not going to calmly sit down and elegantly categorize my thoughts into neat little buckets. That situation is an intense personal emotion, but it's entirely about the business. Where does that go?
And Steve addresses this head-on because it is the most common point of failure for this system. He clarifies that the category of the topic matters much less than your intent when you uncap the pen.
Intent.
Yeah. Ask yourself what you're trying to accomplish in that specific writing session. Are you trying to process the sheer panic, the anxiety, the toll this client is taking on your blood pressure and your sleep?
Right. So if I need to vent about how unfair the situation is just to protect my mental health, that goes in the nightstand notebook. I am processing my inner life.
Precisely. You are dealing with the human reaction. But if you sit down to strategize how to renegotiate the contract, how to cover the revenue shortfall if they leave, or how to systematically transition them to a competitor that is analytical, that goes in the office notebook. The exact same trigger can be explored in both notebooks, but you are doing completely different cognitive work in each one.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And because the intent is different, the tone of the writing on the page will be vastly different, right?
Yeah.
Personal journaling has this meandering quality to it. You might start an entry complaining about your morning commute, and 3 paragraphs later, you are untangling a lingering insecurity from college.
Which is great for personal insights. That wandering lack of structure is a feature, allowing unexpected things to surface. But you cannot afford to wander like that when you are trying to figure out if you have enough cash flow to make payroll next month.
Yeah, I'd imagine not.
Business journaling is highly structured and relentlessly focused. Even a free-form entry has a sense of purpose. You utilize specific questions, targeted prompts, and structured reviews. You explore toward a specific destination. You are writing your way toward a hard decision, a clearer picture of a messy operational situation, or a concrete lesson.
So if the business journal is essentially a diagnostic tool focused on decisions, what happens after you make the diagnosis?
Yeah.
You don't just throw the lab results away.
Yeah.
Which brings us to a massive difference in how these notebooks physically live in your world after the ink dries.
Oh, this is a critical distinction in the practice. Personal journals are generally a write and forget exercise. As we discussed, the value is generated in the physical act of writing. Once the emotion is metabolized, those entries usually stay private, they remain unreviewed, and you rarely need to read them again.
Nobody wants to go back and read 30 pages of themselves agonizing over a bad mood from 4 years ago. It served its purpose in the moment.
Right. But the business journal, however, absolutely demands review. If you are doing it right, it becomes an active reference tool. Steve insists you must return to it. You review your business journal before your quarterly planning sessions. You check the reasoning behind past decisions before you make new similar ones. You actively look for patterns in your operational thinking over months of entries.
Let's test that logic, though, because if I am supposed to review this months later, that completely changes how I need to write it today. If I just brain dump a wall of text with zero context, my future self isn't going to have a clue what I was talking about. What do we actually need to do on the page to make this actionable later?
Because of this reference value, Steve lays out some direct rules for formatting the business journal. You must use basic structure. You must date every single entry. You need to use consistent entry types like labeling, an entry decision, postmortem, or strategy so you know what you're looking at. And, very practically, you must maintain readable handwriting.
I know telling a CEO to write legibly and date the page sounds like kindergarten advice, but it is vital here. Because if you can't read your own writing, the tool is completely broken. Imagine sitting down for your Q3 review. You look back at a decision you made in April to hire a new marketing agency. You read the reasoning you wrote down. Now it is July. Did the agency deliver? If not, was your reasoning flawed? Did you ignore a red flag that you actually documented back in April?
Yes. You're capturing the intellectual property of your own decision-making process. And he emphasizes that you do not need elaborate, complicated systems. You don't need a bullet journal with a color-coded index and tabs. You just need enough baseline organization so the raw data you are capturing is actually useful when you consult it 3 months later to see why that marketing campaign failed.
When you follow those formatting rules, you are essentially turning a $5 blank notebook into a custom-built reference manual for your own company. It becomes an intelligence database entirely focused on your specific business logic, your past mistakes, and your historical data. That is an unparalleled asset.
To build that asset effectively, we have to acknowledge a fundamental tension. We've built this hard wall between the personal and the professional journals, but for a business owner, the personal and professional are deeply, sometimes painfully intertwined. Your personal mindset dictates your daily performance, and your business challenges inevitably bleed over and impact your personal well-being.
Yeah, they really do. So how do we manage this blur without contaminating the database?
Steve outlines 2 acceptable practical approaches for managing this overlap, allowing you to choose the container that fits how your mind works. The first approach is his highly recommended method: 2 strictly separate notebooks. This creates undeniable physical boundaries. It ensures that business analysis never crowds out necessary emotional processing, and vice versa. It forces you to categorize your intent before your pen touches the paper.
Okay, but what if you're someone who just doesn't think like that?
Right, he acknowledges that some people's minds simply do not compartmentalize that cleanly. For those individuals, the second approach is to use one single journal, but you must allow the entry to flow deliberately between categories. For example, a single writing session might start with pure emotional frustration about an employee's mistake.
Sort of getting it out of your system.
Exactly. But instead of staying there, you shift structurally into a cold analysis of what actually went wrong with the training process, and finally end with a practical, strategic plan moving forward.
The key in that single journal approach is the transition. You aren't just venting endlessly. You use the venting as an on-ramp to get to the strategy. Which brings up a really crucial point. Effective business journaling does not mean you suppress the personal or pretend to be an emotionless robot. Instead, it means you use the personal instrumentally to solve your business bottlenecks.
Framing it as instrumental is spot on. You aren't exploring your personal psychology as an end in itself. You interrogate your personal reactions because they are directly impacting a professional outcome. Some of the most valuable business reflection you can do involves examining your own internal blocks in a leadership situation.
The article provides some exact, actionable prompts for this. If a listener is stuck right now on a business problem that they suspect is actually a them problem, what should they do? We need to dissect exactly how an entrepreneur uses these prompts.
Steve provides specific teaching prompts to use when your personal psychology blocks your professional progress. If you are stuck, open your business journal and write down one of these questions. Let's look closely at this one. Why did that feedback bother me so much?
Let's role play that. Say a trusted vendor tells you that your team is notoriously difficult to communicate with. You get incredibly defensive and angry. If you just stew in that anger, you might fire the vendor and lose a great partnership.
But if you take that prompt, why did that feedback bother me so much, and put it under the microscope of the business journal, the perspective shifts. You might write, it bothered me because I pride myself on efficiency. But, looking objectively, my team has missed 3 deadlines this month. The feedback stings because a part of me knows it is accurate.
Oh, wow. You have isolated the variable. By figuring out that your anger is actually rooted in a recognized operational failure, you remove the emotional charge. You stop being bad at the vendor and start fixing your internal communication protocols. You used a personal emotional reaction as a diagnostic tool to find a business flaw.
Exactly. Let's apply that same diagnostic approach to another prompt Steve provides. Why do I keep procrastinating on this particular task? Often, a decision sits on the to-do list for 3 weeks because of an unexamined fear, not a lack of data.
Let's say the task is firing a toxic employee. You keep finding excuses to delay it. The business journal forces you to look at the mechanics. You write it out and realize, I am not procrastinating because I don't know how to fire them. I am procrastinating because I am terrified of the short-term workload it will drop on my plate.
And naming the fear strips its power. You realize the bottleneck isn't a lack of courage, it is a temporary lack of operational capacity. You solve it by bringing in a freelancer first to cover the workload, and then you fire the employee. This perfectly demonstrates the instrumental use of personal insight.
Or consider the final prompt. Where are my assumptions about this person coming from? Think about dealing with an underperforming employee. If you assume they're just lazy, you might write them off.
But if you journal on that assumption, you might realize your bias is coming from a previous bad hire who acted similarly. Getting clear on that prevents you from making a terrible management decision based on ghosts from your past. You realize the current employee just needs better training.
The synergy between the two domains becomes incredibly powerful when you engage with these prompts. By using these practices intentionally, they support each other in a closed loop. Your personal journaling practice provides the emotional regulation necessary to achieve clear, unbiased business thinking.
Yeah, if you handle your anxiety in the nightstand notebook, you won't bring it into the office notebook and infect your strategy.
And the business journaling practice provides the strategic clarity and action plans that directly reduce your personal stress. Knowing exactly what you need to do tomorrow to fix that team communication issue lowers your anxiety tonight. They support each other perfectly, even when they stay in two completely separate physical books.
It really is a framework that respects the complexity of being an entrepreneur while relentlessly demanding clarity and action. You protect your inner life, and you sharpen your business acumen simply by knowing which tool to pick up.
To bring this all together, we want to leave you with one final, provocative thought. It's the exact journal prompt Steve offers in the article, and it is something you can mull over and apply immediately today to test this system. Ask yourself, what professional situation right now is also affecting you personally, and which lens does it need first? That's the practice. Try it this week and see what happens. Subscribe to get notified when new episodes drop, and visit pagesofpossibilities.com for more journaling practices designed for entrepreneurs. Link to the full article is in the description.